Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name's Roshani and I'm one half of the Indecisive Readers. We are in a slightly weird location at the moment. I'm also quite shiny, but that is not going down a bit. But I've just moved rooms again and this one's kind of full of stuff. That blob over there is actually a Hermione cutout, but we have another bookshelf. I don't usually have a bookshelf, this is quite exciting. So, in March I read a total of 10 books to completion, plus all bar 30 pages of another. I also finished 2 from February and got 17% of the way through another. Not that I didn't want to finish reading it, just I was only ever planning on making a start to it. I had some good and bad books. I had some books I thought were going to be really good that ended up being a bit meh, and then I had some like really good books that I enjoyed. If you want to see what books I was planning on reading, you can check out my March TBR, which I will put in the description. I read, or at least started, all but one. I did read an extra one in March that wasn't on that TBR, but I don't think I would have finished it. So anyway, we're just going to get on and see what we can do. So I finished Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I rated that one 3 stars. I also finished The Five by Hallie Rubenhold and rated that one 5 stars. I didn't finish Ash by Melinda Lowe, and I started A History of the World with the Women Put Back In by Kiersten and Ut Denshel. The first book I finished in March was This Lovely City by Louise Hare. This is a book I didn't pick up. This is actually a proof copy of the book that has now come out. This is a book set in Britain during like the Windrush era, so where loads of, particularly men but some women, have come over from the Caribbean to help out in London after the war, after the Blitz, so where London's kind of falling apart a bit. Then something happens and the black community gets blamed. It was a really interesting read because 1, I didn't know anything about Windrush or anything like that, but 2, because it felt just really poignant. At the moment we are going through a bit of a crisis, and for a very long time, and I'm sure if you ask certain people, they would still blame the Chinese. And it's not China as a whole's fault. There are lots of problems throughout the world that have caused it, but certain racist people would just see an Asian person and like do that or shout at them, and even if it wasn't necessarily anything to do with them or they've never been to China in their life. And this kind of covered the same thing. So this black man called Laurie, who is the main character, discovers a body, and so him and then the rest of the black community get blamed for it. And it could have been a really dark story, it could have been really bleak, but it was actually very hopeful. Not because the story or the content is, just because the way it's dealt with is. It's about hope and friendship and love and finding your family in a less than ideal state. It's much more than a murder mystery, which it could have just been. There are trigger warnings for sexual assault, rape and racism, so if you're going to read it, just be wary of those, but they're not like major things, but they do happen. It's just really interesting and I would recommend you all pick it up. I rated it 4 stars. The next book I read for International Women's Day Readathon, which was a 24-hour readathon, and for that I picked up What Magic Is This by Holly Bourne. This is a shorter young adult book published by Barrington Stoke, who publish like books that are dyslexic friendly, and this is about 3 friends who want to be witches and to help solve their issues. So there's one who wants to get over the loss of her dog, one who deals with like some mental health issues, and one that wants to reunite herself with her love. So it covered some really interesting themes. Again, it could have been dark, but it's a very cute, actually witchy book. So if you want something witchy but don't want something too dark, I'd really recommend this. It covered a lot of themes like mental health, eating disorders, so again trigger warnings for those, but they weren't the main focus. So I think if they were the main focus I would have liked it more, but I think if we'd dealt with them more they would have been a bit better. The main focus of this was the romance because the narrator is the one who wants to reunite herself with her love, So I enjoyed the start where they were kind of presenting the witchiness. I liked the end where they were focusing on the friendship, but the middle bit where it was all like romance heavy and she was looking back on the relationship and all that kind of stuff, I just didn't love as much. I rated this one 3.5 stars because I didn't love the romance, but the friendship in it was amazing. The main point of the story is telling you how good friendships are, and romance is maybe fleeting but friendships are forever, and so it's a really important book to exist for younger readers. And because it's quite short, it's very easy to read, very easy to pass on, and it was great for a 24-hour readathon. I obviously finished it in that time, and that was when I started A History of the World with a Woman put back in, and I was doing other stuff that day, which is why I just didn't get on with more. The next book I finished in March was Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This was a new adult contemporary romance set in America with a romance between the president's son and the Prince of England. If you haven't heard of it, where have you been? It's been all over BookTube, Bookstagram, Book Twitter, pretty much everywhere for the last year since it came out. I saw loads of people talking about it. Didn't necessarily want to buy it myself, but it was available from my library as an audiobook and an ebook, and thought, why not put my name down for it? It had like a 3-month waiting list, but I thought it'll come eventually, so it did come eventually. And I rated it 3 stars because everyone else seems to either love or, well, most people seem to love it, but some people hate it, and I just had the things that people didn't like really clearly at my mind. I must have read a review or two before it, and so I just couldn't not think of those. There were a lot of minor characters in this. The main characters I remembered, but a lot of the minor characters I didn't. There were various security staff, various teachers, friends, and I just didn't remember who they were. The characters I did remember were more or less very annoying. The royal family seemed very exaggerated. I wanted to know who okayed Henry as a prince's name, because obviously that is our prince's name. There was a lot of diversity, which I really enjoyed. Obviously there's LGBT plus rep, but there's also POC, and like single mother isn't necessarily a representation, but the president is not only a female, but she's also like a single mum. The ex-husband and boyfriend are there, but primarily she's like a single mum, and that was really interesting. That said, who's the president's son? Alex. He looks very white on the cover. The emails and texts as a correspondence were quite interesting and were obviously vital because they live on opposite sides of the world, but as an audiobook they didn't work well, because hearing someone say, how do you say it, LMAO, or you know, where they keyboard smash, just like I said, doesn't work. Yeah, I just didn't like how the romance developed. It was kind of like hate you, let's sex, I love you, and then the romantic feelings developed, and that just doesn't commute with me. The next book I read in March was The Guinevere Deception by Kiersten White. This was the February and March pick for Mistake Read, and also something for Femme Readathon. It crossed out the prompts. A retelling, new to you author, woman with a weapon, book in a series, historical setting, non-human protagonist, and YA. For the backlist readathon it was something with blue on the cover. So it covered a lot of things, and I did finish it. It was a very quick, easy read, but it was nothing what it promised to be. Basically it promised to be a Fae retelling of Arthurian legend, but there were no really battles, and there was definitely not a lot of magic. Nothing really happened for maybe 300 out of the 330 pages. Just, it felt like maybe they were trying to squeeze multiple books out of what could have been one long one, but it was fine as an easy, uncomplicated read, which I kind of wanted. I enjoyed being able to read through it quickly. It was good for like a week-long readathon. It was frustrating there wasn't anything it promised to be. Like on the back it says deadly joust, duplicitous knights and forbidden romances. Didn't really have any of those. It had Joust and Knights obviously, but the romance I don't think warranted a mention on the back. It was like a few pages long. I also couldn't tell which way it was going to go, but the way I wanted it to go, I didn't actually expect it to go that way, but it's frustrating it didn't. I thought there was a friendship building up that could have been a romance, but it didn't look like it was going to go that way. Arthur is explored as a young king in this, which is quite unusual. We don't remember that he was like the boy king. We just see him as like a 20-30-year-old who is established in his rule, but it was interesting to see him as a boy who, yes, can rule and can plot things, but is also more interested in sometimes just playing football or whatever the medieval equivalent is. I also really enjoyed the character of the Patchwork Knight. I expected them to be who they were, but I didn't expect that character to go in that way. I rated it 4/3.5 stars. I enjoyed it, didn't love it, and I think I will get these sequels out from the library like I did with this one. The next book I read was The Frog Princess by E.D. Baker. This crosses out middle grade, book in a series, non-human protagonist, and shortest book on TBR. This is the book that inspired The Princess and the Frog, the like Disney movie, where it's a princess who kisses a frog to turn him back into a prince, but accidentally turns into a frog herself, and then has to go on a journey to reverse that decision because obviously she doesn't want to be a frog. I thought this was a really interesting and fun middle grade with fun characters, interesting magic. It was funny in like a weird way. So the princess pretended to be the swamp fairy by dressing up with leaves and wings, and it was really cute. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed how it developed. The relationship between the two frogs was really interesting. It was like quite a genuine relationship rather than a forced one that they had to be married or they had to like each other. It felt like that they were genuinely developing this friendship, and that would then develop into a romance. The kiss in this had consent, which is pretty unusual for a fairy tale, so I enjoyed that and thought that was great to include in a middle grade book. Also, the princess in this wasn't perfect, but she didn't have to change to be perfect at any point in the book. They just accepted her for not being perfect, and that's a pretty important thing, that you don't have to walk properly, you don't have to laugh like a tinkling bells, and you can tell jokes and it's good. I like it. It was really fun. I rated it 3 stars. The next book I read was Daughters of Henri by Renee K. Ameo. This fit the prompts: woman with a weapon, new to you author, BAME author, YA, something recommended, and a book you're excited about. This is about 2 sisters called Nala and Sinai, who were born in a world where the gods have been destroyed and where twins are meant to die, but they get separated so people don't know that they're twins, at least they don't. And one's brought up in a palace and the other's brought up on a farm, and various things happen to each of them that make them realise Eze, who's like the king, isn't actually all that good and is actually pretty bad. The world is meant to worship him, but they realise he's not so good. I went in with really high expectations of this. This is like an African mythology retelling, and it was really interesting insight into that, or introduction into that even, but it just kind of let me down. There was nothing necessarily bad about it, but I had the same problems with this as I did with the Guinevere Deception, where not a lot happened and it was almost like they were trying to squeeze multiple books out of what could have just been 1 or 2. The big crux of the story that they were building up to, I thought was going to be like the final thing, but happened at the end of this one rather than like the end of the trilogy. So I don't know where the trilogy is going to go, and I will probably continue to buy it, but when it eventually happened, it happened quite quickly, and this whole reunion that they were building up to also happened quite quickly. It was only kind of granted like 3 or 5 pages, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was just very short, could have had a lot more. The world they built was interesting, but again, brief. It was almost like snippets. I hope we're gonna like get invited into it more in sequels. And there was a very weird kind of niche problem I had with it. So a problem in a lot of white books with black characters is their skin is described as like chocolate or caramel or cocoa, and it happened in this too. Why? Like, you could have, we know that they're all going to be black. You could just leave it and not explain it, or even just say they had dark skin or they had lighter skin, but doing that weird food description just seems a bit off, and I just can't understand why it was present in this. If I didn't say, I rated this one 3 stars. Next on my list was Physique by Andy Sage. I didn't actually think I'd complete it this month, but I just wanted a simple, easy read that I could get through, and this is like one of my comfort reads, I've realised now, because it's my favourite series of all time. It is the 3rd book in the Septimus Heap series, which follows a boy called Septimus who discovers he's the 7th son of a 7th son and is like due to be like a magical amazing wizard. And there's also a princess called Jenna and Septimus's family, and this is set in their present day as well as 500 years in the past, where an alchemist called Marcellus Pye wants to work with Septimus. So this book involves history, magic, royalty, a very extra alchemist, and a teenage dragon. So like a teenage dragon who sleeps late in the day and burps a lot and destroys everything. But by extra alchemist, I mean he has shoes so long they have to tie them to his knees, otherwise he trips over, and I think that's great. Although I already knew I liked this, I couldn't remember a lot about it because it's been so long since I've read it, and obviously I didn't remember as much as I thought I would. So I was surprised by everything as it happened. It also made me laugh out loud a lot, which was great. There were just various bits where Sam was sat next to me and I would read them out loud, and it was really comforting, it was really easy, and I loved it so much. It had a lot of returning characters, so characters we've met before that had fun stories, or you'd see them be like, oh look, it's them. But also there were just as many new characters, so good and bad, and it was just really interesting to see them and see what they were going to do and work out who's going to carry on, and I loved it. Definitely 5 stars. I have never done a wrap up so quickly. I think it is because I have so many. I should do these more often. The next book I finished, I had started earlier, was The Diviners by Libba Bray. This is a weird combination of books. This is like a steampunk, horror, fantasy, mystery novel. It covers so many different genres and so many different stories. Mainly based in 1920s New York, and follows this girl called Evie who is sent there because she keeps misbehaving at home, and when she's there this occult killer keeps leaving these weird bodies around the place with various body parts missing and also runes and notes left all over the body, and they're kind of left to work out who it is. We as a reader do see the murders, and so it's frustrating to not let them know that what's happening that they don't know, but we also follow like 20 other stories. And that was one thing I didn't love about it. I read this as an audiobook and it was a very good audiobook, but I think I needed the like physical book to read along with it because it goes in so many different directions and there are so many different characters. I just didn't really follow it. I think if the physical book has like a character list at the back or just allows you to read it without getting distracted, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. I think it just wasn't the book I wanted to read at the moment, so I'm sure I will check out the sequels. I'm just in no rush to. It was a book that was very much setting itself up to be in a series, which again was fine, just I wasn't quite in the mood for it this time. When I read the sequels I will be checking out the physical book as well. It was also quite long, like it took a while to get to like the crux, and then that was quite quick, and then there was like an hour of audiobook afterwards with again setting stuff up for the sequel, and it was fine. I just wasn't blown away with it. I mean, it was very rich, it was very well written, it was full of characters that were really interesting but just too many for me to follow, and that's my fault rather than the book, so maybe rating it 3 stars is a bit harsh, but what can we do? The next book I read in March I wasn't meant to pick up, but I wanted a quick and easy read to break up one book I will mention at the end and also The Diviners, and so I picked up Nimona from the library, which is basically a graphic novel about a girl who joins the villain team and fights the good guys. So I picked this up because it's a graphic novel, so I knew it'd be very quick. I didn't know what to expect going into it, but it was actually really, really fun. I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was an interesting discussion of good and bad and whether the names we give them are correct. So we are on the bad guys team, but we see what the good guys are doing and see that some of the stuff they're doing isn't necessarily good. Like, they talk to people, they keep in supply stuff that's meant to be bad, and it was just really, really interesting, and I'd recommend it to a lot of people. I rated it 4 stars. The art style was really interesting. It was hard to read on my phone, I'll give it that, because I got it from my library as an ebook. It was like quite small writing, it's not like 1 picture per page, it's like 6 or 8 or something, and so it was quite small to like have to bring my phone up to my face kind of thing, but that's my fault rather than the book. Can't knock it down for that. Nimona's shape-shifting was a really interesting thing, and I liked how we didn't necessarily get all the answers for it. The characters were also really interesting and fun, and they did make me laugh. There were a couple of scenes at the back, like some bonus scenes, where I don't know if they were meant to be in it and just cut out, or whether they were just drawn for fun by the author/illustrator, who I don't think I mentioned, but it's called Noel Stevenson. And Nimona gives, what's the guy called? Can't remember what the guy's called. Gives him a scarf or a jumper, and he's like, "Oh, thanks." And she's like, "Oh, I transformed into a sheep, and I knitted it with my own wool. It was really hard knitting with hooves, but I got the hang of it eventually." And it was very cute, and it was fun, and it was heartwarming, which is weird for like a villain story, but it was cute and heartwarming and a bit fuzzy. The next thing I read in March was Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. This is the second book in the Hunger Games trilogy, which follows a girl called Katniss. She gets picked for a tournament called the Hunger Games, which involves throwing 24 children into an arena once a year where they have to fight to the death, and there's only one victor. As I said, this is the second book in the series, so stuff has happened in the first one. The rebellion is really beginning to like take root in this one, and I knew it was my favourite, and then I actually listened to the audiobook. I didn't read it because I was doing stuff over the weekend that I could just listen to it, and it was really, really good. I love it so much. I did remember obviously a lot of what happens in this, but I didn't remember a lot of the details from the book. So I have seen the film recently, but I forgot how like prominent the wedding is in this. So the trying on of the wedding dresses, but also we get more of an insight into Katniss's thoughts and what she's thinking, what she's planning. I thought that was well done in the book compared to the film, because obviously we can't see into Katniss's head in the film, but I think hearing her thoughts, hearing her plans, hearing how she feels about people is much more interesting in the books. So I think seeing what she thinks about Peter, but also what she thinks about Gale is interesting, as well as the rebellion. I got frustrated by Gale because I've seen arguments saying that they think Gale should have ended up with Katniss because she has always relied on him, he's always been the one there for her, whereas Peter just like threw a loaf of bread. And whilst that's true, I am so team Peter and will fight you for it, but it's not necessarily about who's always been there for her, it's who Katniss chooses, and if Katniss chooses Peter, she's chosen Peter. We shouldn't be fighting her for that. That's her decision. If that's the wrong decision, she's made it. And so in this, Gale's always kissing her or saying he loves her, and don't like it. And also I feel like when Katniss kisses him or says something to him, I feel like she almost feels like she has to, not necessarily that she wants to, and I feel sorry for her. But I love the games in this. I think the concept of the game in this is really interesting with the clock and the different sections, and I think as an actual game it would be really hard to like combat, and so I think it was very well done and I really enjoyed this, and I enjoyed it. I was going to say more, but I enjoyed it as much as I thought I would. I rated this 5 stars. The final book I started in March, I actually finished 30 pages into April, but we're going to include it because April's another TBR, and that was The Mercies by Kieran Millward Hargrave. This is a historical fiction thing of an event that happened in Norway in a town called Vardø in 1617, where all the men in the village are killed in a storm, and it just leaves the women to survive for themselves for about a year, and then this witch hunter turns up, and 2 years after the storm they begin witch trials there, and it's filling that gap. So we know that there was the storm and we know that there were the witch hunts because that's like real life history, and this book is just filling that gap, giving women the voice, giving women the chance to tell their story. And so I thought it was a really interesting way of doing that. I did enjoy it, but I only rated it 3 stars because, again, it wasn't the book I wanted to read now, and I felt a bit like I was slogging through it. Not that I actually wanted to read it, but I was reading it because I wanted it done, which is a bad way to read a book. It felt, it's gonna sound weird, but it felt a bit like a contemporary set in the past. So contemporaries generally, at least the contemporaries I don't like, the ones I have trouble with, generally tend to just be like, this is day-to-day life, this is us making bread, this is us churning butter, this is us doing this and that, and it felt like it was doing that just set in the past. So yeah, they were making butter rather than watching TV, and it didn't interest me necessarily. The last like 60 or 30 pages were much more interesting, and it's when like the witch trials really started to take place, but didn't necessarily feel anything for the characters. It was very richly done, which I think again made it quite heavy to read, but it was good, just not for me right now. I may come back to it another time and enjoy it more. I was briefly considering DNF in it just because I knew I wasn't in the mood for it, but I did want to finish it. But it was good. Just, I like many of the books on this DBR, not for me at this moment. So those are all the books, or like some of the physical books I read in March. I did enjoy more or less the books I read. I'm glad I've read all these books, and I think even if I didn't love them, I enjoyed all of these books. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing if you're not already. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if you want to. I'm really sorry if I put you off any of those. I am doing Goodreads reviews for all of these books, and I've reviewed a couple on the blog, so I will link those all down below if you want like my more immediate thoughts or my more coherent thoughts. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!